Thanks for tuning in to Women's Voices. My name is Genevieve Gluck, and in this episode, I'm speaking with Jennifer Lahl, who is the founder and president of the Center for Bioethics and Culture Network, which, according to the mission statement, exists to educate and inform members of the general public, thought leaders, lawmakers, and others on ethical issues in healthcare, biomedical research, and biotechnological advancement. Jennifer Lahl has over 25 years of experience as a pediatric critical care nurse, a hospital administrator, and in senior-level nursing management. She has made several documentaries with a particular focus on exploring the exploitation of women by the Assisted Reproductive Technologies industry, including Breeders, a Subclass of Women, Big Fertility, and Eggsploitation. Her most recent film, titled Transmission: What's the Rush to Assign Gender?, questions the ethics of medically transitioning children and reveals some of the harms, both emotional and physical, of childhood sex reassignment procedures and medications. Hi, Jennifer. It's really nice to be talking with you. I've been following your work on the surrogacy issue for a while now, and you've done some incredible work with bringing awareness to the industry, especially in regards to the medical abuses. So can you explain your background, your educational background, and your experience in the medical industry and how you got interested in making movies? Because I know you've made several documentaries about surrogacy.
Yeah. Well, hello. It's nice to finally meet you and chat with you because I, like you, have been following your work for quite some time. So it's nice to finally talk with you. But yeah, I worked for 20 years in clinical nursing. So I have a bachelor's degree in nursing, and I most of my career was in pediatrics, pediatric critical care. And then sort of the last decade of my career, I went into hospital nursing management at Children's Hospital in Oakland, California, because I'm in the Bay Area. And I went back to graduate school and studied bioethics. I've always been interested in sort of the ethics around new emerging technologies, especially when you're dealing with children. There's always, a new treatment. When I was a nurse in San Francisco, working at UC San Francisco, I worked with the surgeon who did the first, took the baby out of the uterus and did the surgery to repair a defect and then plop the baby back in the uterus. So the baby had surgery before it was even born. So I was just always fascinated working mostly in university and big academic hospitals. That's where you're sort of pushing the envelope. And of course, in pediatrics, it's a lot of, premature children that are born with lots of issues. And so I just had, was really interested in not only pursuing an advanced degree, but also an advanced degree that was focused on ethics. Just because we can do something doesn't mean we should do it. So, but when I was in graduate school, I got sort of engrossed with this whole field because there was just so much biotechnology stuff coming faster than, and before, with this new stuff down the pike. And I live in the backyard of the Silicon Valley. So, just sort of what's the next new thing? And I just decided to start a nonprofit because, the nurses were already just educators anyway. We're always educating children how to manage their disease, their illness, their medication. We're educating parents, how to take care of this child once they leave the hospital, so they can, do well at home. So I launched the Center for Bioethics and Culture. It's been 21 years ago now. I'm old. I can't believe it's been that long. Just to be an educational resource to talk about things that were coming. And I sort of landed in the whole space of assisted reproduction. And I think that was one, because I was a pediatric nurse. So I took care of a lot of IVF babies in the ICU. Because most people don't realize that, just because we have this new assisted reproduction, it's not without problems to mothers who use IVF and then the babies. And then kind of quickly, I realized that we're not a reading culture anymore. And that came about because I pitched a couple of books, and I wrote, a pretty exhaustive book pitch with sample chapters and tables of contents, and publishers were just saying it's just a really hard time to, sell books. and promote books. And, unless you're sort of you've got 15 bestsellers under your belt and you just know you have an audience waiting to buy your book, it's probably not going to happen. And one of my colleagues who's down at Stanford, he said, you should make movies. People watch movies. And I thought, well, that's a good idea. So Eggsploitation was my first film. That's a movie about young women in the United States who were university students who saw ads to sell their eggs and did it and had horrible complications. We shot that film in a weekend, 2 days of shooting interviews. And within 4 weeks, we had the film done, scripted, edited, ready to go. And we won the Best Documentary Award in the California Independent Film Festival that year. And it just sort of set off, it was like, okay, well, so that's sort of how we got into making movies. And people do listen to stories. If they're interesting, of course, they have to be interesting or compelling. And so since then, we've just sort of kept in that sort of space. So one of our big projects is what's the new film? And I think we've made 9 now. So Transmission, that we'll talk about later, in our conversation, is our most recent film. And that film was released in June, so 3 months ago, and we're quickly approaching 80,000 views on YouTube. So it's done really well in a very short period of time. But of course, it's a really hot topic. So anyway, I'll stop there. But that's sort of the short version of the last 21 years.
So how did your work with Assisted Reproductive Technologies lead towards the transgender issue and the medical abuses going on there? Was it related to your investigative work in surrogacy? I mean, generally, how did you get involved in this topic?
Yeah, well, the sort of the way the whole movement in third-party conception means you're using either egg donors, sperm donors, and or surrogates, or some combination of all of those in some cases. And what happened was the trans movement sort of encroached in my space. So we went from, assisted reproduction was helping infertile heterosexual couples to then we had men having babies, and we know that men can't have babies. Men were having babies because they were buying eggs and renting wombs. Then it went to trans women and trans men having babies through assisted reproduction. And then a big study came out maybe 3-4 months ago now, saying that trans women want to have uterine transplants so that they can experience pregnancy, labor, delivery, the whole, woman experience of being pregnant and having a child. And then, just in my research, I found out that children, before they medically or surgically transition, are offered fertility preservation. So freezing and banking their egg or sperm early before they transition to the opposite sex. And of course, all of my writing have been in uterine transplants and artificial wombs and women who are banking and freezing their eggs so that they can keep working at Google and Facebook and not have to stop out of the job market. So all these things I was already writing about and concerned about, all of a sudden was happening in the space of the trans movement. And that's when we decided that we would make a documentary film. And because I was a pediatric nurse, and my partner in this film, Callie Fell, is currently a labor and delivery nurse. We focus predominantly on the debate around children and allowing children to medically and surgically transition and the ethics around that debate.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought that up. Essentially, as you're saying, they're expanding the fertility market to people that they are making infertile. So they're medicalizing gender nonconformity and causing infertility in people, which just drives the surrogacy market, don't you think?
Yeah, and there, a lot of the, we'll talk about a lot of the drugs are similar. Egg donors and surrogates take Lupron. Children are put on Lupron. Fertility drugs, hormones are all part of the whole assisted reproduction and trans package. Now, they're different specialty physicians. You're not seeing a reproductive endocrinologist if you're a child or an adult who's wanting to transition to the opposite sex, and not that you can do that. You're seeing a different, practitioner, if you will, but a lot of the treatments and drugs and stuff are similar. So there's and then the whole ethics around it. One of my concerns as a nurse is what is the proper role of medicine in this space of assisted reproduction and this space of transitioning, when we see a lot of it's driven by profit and big money, big fertility, big pharma. And that's sort of a corruption of just good medical practice when we're doing things without really good studies and safety and protections and things that were really important in my years of working in hospital nursing. We never really used patients or exploited people for their body parts or for our checkbook.
I want to come back to that point, especially about Lupron. But first, let's talk about your movie, Transmission. What's the rush to assign gender? First of all, as you said, it's doing pretty well on YouTube, with over 80,000 views already, and it came out at the end of June. So that's incredible in the first place, that it hasn't been removed yet, and so many people have watched it. I think you did a good job of making it a palatable amount of time, so viewers can get a wealth of information in there in only about 50 minutes. What was one of the most surprising discoveries for you in the process of making this documentary?
Well, there was a few, but I think, and I've said this to other people I've spoken about since the movie came out, because we did interview 2 detransitioners. So for those listening that don't know, that's people that did medically, surgically, try to alter their body to the opposite sex and then realize that it didn't solve anything. And those are just really difficult stories, because these are people, the 2 in particular that we interviewed, just had massive amounts of childhood trauma, abuse, neglect, just, things that are just chilling to even imagine that children go through. And so they were just troubled people that thought they got wrapped up in, like Hachi talks about, this ideation, just wrapped up in this being born in the wrong body kind of stuff. And the fact that, the people that in the medical profession that should have been there to protect them, offered these kind of treatments to them as a solution, and that this would make things better for them, only for them to realize that it didn't solve anything. And that's just was really hard for me to hear, because it makes me sort of ashamed of medicine, and sort of, regret what medicine sort of has become. Because these 2 individuals and many of the other detransitioners who are very outspoken and public on social media, you hear them say over and over again that they needed help, but they needed therapy or counseling or all kinds of other things. It's not like I recognize that these people have are troubled and have deep depression and anxiety and this sort of disconnect, that they don't feel that they're in the right body. I acknowledge and recognize all that, but there's so many other things that these people should be being offered in our compassion and our sort of therapeutic taking care of them. So that was just really hard. And I think if I was to make another movie in this space, I'd probably want to focus really heavily on the detransition voices in the stories. There's something there that's common in not all of them, but in a lot of them.
Yeah, I agree with you, especially about the tragedy of what detransitioners go through. And then on top of that, to be stigmatized, ostracized by the activists, it's really heartbreaking.
Just the hatred that's thrown at them. This is cruel. I mean, we had that 60 Minutes episode in the US that featured, a small segment of the whole entire segment on the trans issue, did a lot, the opportunities. I think there was five, maybe 6 detransition voices, and just the outrage that 60 Minutes would dare even to include those voices. And in our film, we actually included 2 voices that were very pro allowing children. One is a psychiatrist and one is a pediatrician that's head of a gender clinic on the East Coast. And we got some criticism from just some rad feminist friends that thought we had no business including their voices. And I was just pretty convinced that, in our film, that we needed to present those voices, or else, and the people that have seen the film that are critical of it, is just, it's a propaganda piece. It's, it's a hit piece. They don't acknowledge the fact that we included, people that are in favor of this. But I did think it was important to let the audience hear from all of the stakeholders.
I do think it's telling too, when you have that perspective that's in favor of, for example, giving puberty blockers to children. There was a moment when one of the clinicians faltered when talking about the side effects, which I noticed because it seemed a bit inauthentic, in that so often we're being told that doctors don't know what the side effects will be, but then we're also told that no, this isn't medical experimentation, which is contradictory in my view. So I think it's good that you showed that.
There's so much that was said that didn't make it into the film that ended up on the cutting room floor, which always just makes you so sad as a filmmaker, because a lot of good stuff just couldn't make it. We didn't want to film that last 27 hours. But this notion from the people that are in support of this, they kind of are inconsistent, because on one hand, they want to absolutely say there's nothing wrong with these children. This is all spectrum. There's all this gender, diversity, that this is evolution, and, this is just part of the human evolutionary process. And some people are this and some people are that. And then I would sort of kind of try to push on that and say, but then why are we medicalizing? Because if this is just diversity, this is evolution, just doing what evolution does, our job is to just get out of the way then and let, Mother Nature or evolution just do what, there's nothing, because so there was this frustration, because they would be like, there's nothing wrong with these children. And then it's like, well, why do they need to go to a clinic and take medication then and be, prepared for surgery down the road if they end up that way? So yeah, it was interesting. So I don't think, but on the other hand, I genuinely think that physicians and therapists and psychiatrists that are in support of this absolutely believe that this is what these children need. They're not, overwhelmingly, they're not shysters and snake oil salesmen. They absolutely think that this is the new proven therapy for how to take care of children that are in some kind of a gender distress, gender dysphoric condition.
Speaking of that, I wanted to mention John Money. You highlighted a quote of his briefly in your documentary, and I'm bringing this up because, well, I try to bring it up as often as I can, since most people don't seem to be aware of who he is. So just to explain quickly, John Money was a sexologist who, over the course of a couple of decades, he published a lot of literature on his theories about gender schemas, which is where we got the term gender identity. And there was a famous case of a boy named David Reimer, whose circumcision was botched. And John Money tried to raise this boy as a little girl through a series of experiments. And this child grew up, he found out what had happened to him, and he was extremely depressed, and he ended up committing suicide as an adult. So all in all, the whole story is a complete tragedy, a failure on the part of the medical community for him. And you had a quote of John Money's in Transmission, which I noticed because I just bought a book of his, actually, Sexual Signatures, which was published in 1975. And in it, he describes things that are difficult to repeat. For example, he recommends showing pornography to children to help them understand their gender identity. And you had a quote of his in the film, so I'll let you explain why it is that you chose to include that quote.
Yeah, and just if I could say something about that one young boy, it's tragic because his twin brother ended up committing suicide as well. So just the deep, deep trauma and harm that experiment that Money thought he could play on this little boy, it was just, and again, they're similar with the parents in our film, because, they're standing there looking, and Money was at Johns Hopkins. So he wasn't just some, guy that hung out a shingle in some back alley clinic. He was at a prestigious university, and, parents go to those kind of physicians and they believe them because they think, I don't know what to do. So, and so Money came up when we were actually doing one of the interviews with one of the reproductive endocrinologists who, had done some studying down at Johns Hopkins. So he actually referenced Money. And so at that point, we thought, okay, well, we're going to reference him. And so the quote we put in, and I don't remember it exactly, but he was just basically normalizing, consensual sex between underage children and adults. And this notion that children, because one of the big issues around allowing children to transition is this area of consent. And there's no way in my mind that a child can ever consent to having any kind of sexual, encounter with an adult. There's just too much unequalness in the relationships between adult and child. And that, of course, is similar in, decisions about permanent life-altering surgeries and interventions into their sexual bodies and their physical bodies. So, money, started out just sort of working on, transsexuals and men with fetishes and part of him, he was just trying to normalize all this. Again, there's nothing wrong with these people. And, it's the same old stuff we find ourselves fighting over and over again. We don't want men in women's prisons. I'm sorry, there's no equalness here. There's no equalness with children and adults. There's just no way to level those kind of playing fields. So, and as an educational documentary filmmaker, we wanted the audience to know sort of the roots of some of this thinking. Of course, it's not exhaustive, and that we can, hang all of this at the feet of money and his horrible experiments and what he did. But, just to give a little historical perspective of how did we get from, men that just like to in their privacy wear their wives' underwear, to sort of sneaking around, dressing up like women, to, it's part of there's some history there.
For sure. And I always find it interesting that trans activists repeat this line that gender and sex, they're not the same thing, but then advocate altering their sexed bodies to try to match gender stereotypes, but also that a lot of this way of thinking, at least on the medical side, has come from sexology. John Money was a sexologist, and several other pioneers of the surgeries and medical interventions were sexologists. And these are people, mostly men, who were studying sexuality. And I mean, it just seems pretty clear that the root of this is coming from a place of a kind of adult male sexuality, and now we have this being expanded to include children. Let's go ahead and talk about Lupron, though. This is something I've been really wanting to talk about with you because of its relation to the surrogacy industry. So can you explain what the connection is between surrogacy and the medicalizing of gender nonconforming children, especially in regards to the use of Lupron?
Yeah, well, first, let me just say Lupron is a drug that has a really bad history. I mean, there's just been, lawsuits and complaints. A colleague friend of mine, I've lost touch with her over the years. She runs a site called the Lupron Victims Hub. She herself, was given Lupron and lives with lifelong chronic health problems. But it was first FDA approved for men in end-stage prostate cancer. In the hopes of shrinking so they would put men to shrink the prostate down, to try to get it either into a manageable size that they can go in and resect it, cut it out, remove it, radiate it, whatever. And then I think several years later, it did get an FDA approval for use in endometriosis, but it's a drug that stops in women, which is why they put it on egg donors or women surrogates. It sort of, I use the phrase medical menopause. So it stops ovarian function. So in the egg donor, they want to stop her ovarian function, put her into medical menopause, because they're trying to synchronize when they want to harvest her eggs so that they can make the embryos that are going into whoever else's body, another woman who needs an egg donor or a gay couple that needs an egg donor. And so after her ovaries have gone to sleep, and they decide it's now time to wake them up again, then they will put her on different hormones to cause her ovaries to produce lots of eggs. In the surrogate, again, it's used to time. They're trying to get the surrogate mother's cycle, her womb ready for the embryo transfer that she's going to carry as a surrogate mother. So they want to stop her cycle, put her ovaries to sleep, and then put her on the hormones to start then preparing her uterus to receive this embryo. Children, they do use it sometimes in the case of what's called precocious puberty. So there are cases where children, and it's not in their best interest medically to go into puberty at, say, 5 or 6 years of age. So there are medical indications where a child who's just showing really, really early signs of going into puberty, that they will put these children on Lupron for a while and then try to start puberty, and again, there's no normal puberty, it's a wide range. And we know because of environment and affluence that we're going into puberty much younger now. When I was, around, it was like 11, 12, 13, me and my girlfriends were having our period. And now it's sometimes little girls as young as 9 and even younger. So sometimes in that case, they'll put children on it just to let them be children longer. So they're not a 6-year-old that has a beard and an Adam's apple and a deep voice and all the kids are making fun of them, or a little girl who's, in kindergarten and starting to sprout breasts. But yeah, so they do use it too to block puberty. So in the transmission film, there's this sort of magical thing that has to happen. We have to pause or block puberty. And so these children are put on Lupron to stop them from going into puberty as if they were a precocious pubescent kind of a child. But what's interesting is most people don't realize, and I take every opportunity I can to say, is that Lupron has what's called a category X rating. So drugs that are approved by FDA are given different kind of categories of, risks, and are they carcinogenic? And Lupron is category X, which means if you get pregnant while you are on Lupron, and that is raging through your system, your chances of having a child with major deformities is very, very high, if not guaranteed. So I always say, it's crazy out of our mind that we're putting, egg donors who may be sexually active, even though egg donors are told, don't be sexually active while you're in your egg donation process. But, people are not always compliant. And the same with surrogate mothers, even though they're told do not have intercourse during this period of time. Things happen. You have too much to drink, your husband comes home looking really good, or your boyfriend or whatever. So you're kind of playing with fire when you put people, and again, these are women who don't need this drug, or children who don't need this drug. Why are we putting people on these drugs that they don't need, that have, some, like in the case of many on the Lupron Victims Hub, a lifelong of chronic problems that are probably directly resulting from taking of Lupron. It would be a great day if Lupron got pulled off the market. And it's not uncommon to use drugs off label. So even though it's not been approved for this use, we have all kinds of drugs that are used off label all the time. So I'm not just bashing it's off label and, it shouldn't be used. Because, it's just a long process. And once a drug has been FDA approved onto the market for that use, it got its FDA approval, it can then be used in any way a doctor sees fit. And sometimes that lends itself to really good information, because they'll put their patient on a particular drug and they'll notice a benefit that they weren't expecting. And by the way, it fixed this or it fixed that. So part of being able to use drugs off label isn't always bad. But in this case, it's proven over and over again to be hugely problematic.
Yeah, so there are a couple of things I wanted to say about that, which is, first of all, the 2001 lawsuit where the makers of Lupron, Takeda Abbott Pharmaceuticals, were found to be essentially to be bribing doctors. So they were providing kickbacks to doctors for prescribing Lupron. And at the time, this was the biggest medical fraud lawsuit in the US. TAP paid out an $875 million settlement. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that I'm not personally convinced that the side effects of Lupron are unknown, because of the known side effects experienced by women who have been put on Lupron for issues such as endometriosis, uterine fibroids, and so on. And we do know, for example, that they have chronic pain, brittle bones, early onset menopause, women in their 20s reporting their bones fracturing, their teeth falling out. Awful, awful things, And so here we are taking that same drug and giving it to children and saying we don't know what the side effects will be. Well, I think people are saying that because they're saying we don't know what the side effects will be for children, right? Whereas we do know what the side effects are for women and what the side effects are for men. I find it astonishing that this drug, Lupron, is only given to men when they are in need of cancer treatment or dying of cancer, or when they are convicted sex offenders. And they don't even give Lupron to just any sex offenders, but the worst, most dangerous, and most recidivist men to chemically castrate them due to its known intense side effects.
Which is what they're doing to a little boy when they put him on Lupron to block his puberty. It's a medical castration. And, I've interviewed several egg donors who stayed in menopause. So, once their whole egg donation cycle was done, they never had periods again. They could not go on and achieve a but back to being able to prove it's safe in children or not. It's a double-edged sword because I don't want children to have this drug. And in order to prove what it does to children and harms them, we have to have children take it and follow them and, and have big samples and do, big studies on it that can be, good peer-reviewed kind of studies. So there's this conflict. It's like, well, I don't want to say, let's find out if Lupron is harmful to children, because I just want to say, let's not do this. It's experimentation. Right now, we do not know what the effects of children are to do this to them, to put them on these drugs. Therefore, we have no business doing it because, part of informed consent is being informed of the risks. We can inform parents of the risks when they're being asked to consent. All they're being told is, this is, the proven standard of care for treating your child and their gender dysphoria. So we have to do this. And parents are like, oh, okay, you're the expert, I'm not. You're telling me that this is what my child needs in order to get better. Oh, okay. But I think we have a huge ethical problem here on our hands because I don't want children to take these drugs so we can have the data. They're the guinea pigs. And then we'll say, oops, now we know it's bad.
In the case of surrogacy, I know that the FDA hasn't required any long-term follow-up research.
Nor in egg donors either.
So is that something they're going to do for these children then? Require long-term follow-up research?
The pushback that I've gotten, and I've testified at, Capitol Hill, I've testified at state levels, it's very expensive to set up a whole new regulatory framework. You have to set up, like we have tumor banks, that track everybody who's had some kind of a cancer. We have all kinds of breast cancer databases. We have organ transplant donor. We track organ donors. We track organ recipients. So there'd have to be a whole nother layer. And everybody goes, well, who's going to pay for that? And who's going to manage it? And who's going to oversee it? And, I just kind of go, well, you guys are the federal government, figure it out. Who's over organ tracking? It's the United Network of Organ Sharing. Can't you set up the United Network of exploiting women for their reproductive bodies or exploiting children, figure it out. It's the 21st century, but you get all this sort of, looking at, well, maybe everybody wants to punt. The industry, big fertility and big pharma doesn't want to do the studies. Why would they want to do anything that might, one, cost a lot of money? It would have to be a pretty big sample size, a big major study that tracked people over 5, 10, 15, 20 years. They don't want to pay for this. They're just happy to, keeping everybody in the dark and just keep, the money coming. So, it just gets back to, that's why I'm so hell bent on just educating people. Please don't sell your eggs if you're thinking about doing it. Please don't ask a young woman to risk her own body because you need her body to help you get the child of your dreams. Please, let's stop, experimenting and harming children and doing things that we can't undo. We cannot reverse. We cannot give them back whatever it is we cut off or add on or, listen to the Detransitioners. Let's figure out another way to help these children that are clearly in distress.
I find it a bit hypocritical, this focus by the trans activists on saying things such as, without these drugs, these children will kill themselves, which is ethically highly questionable, in my opinion, in the first place, because it introduces suicidality to children, and kids are very suggestible. But at the same time, there was an actual real spike in suicide attempts among young girls, which has been directly linked to social media use. And there seems to be this silence about that from trans activists and people promoting puberty blockers. So here we have a hypothetical suicidality situation versus a documented ongoing situation at the moment. And I don't know if you read Abigail Schreier's book, Irreversible Damage, about the rise of young girls presenting with what's called gender dysphoria, which truly is a kind of a body dysmorphic disorder. And girls are much more susceptible to dysmorphia, much more so than boys. And I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Several of the parents that we interviewed in Transmission talked about how the suicide, my words, card is played. If you don't do this, your child will commit suicide. And what I found extremely unconscionable is that oftentimes the physician would say this to the parent with the child right there in the room. And as you say, children are very susceptible. Those are big people conversations that should not be being taken place, with minors, in earshot. I think that's just unprofessional, unethical. I'm sure it's not illegal, but it's just really bad practice of care. And we don't have that kind of data on, if we don't allow children to transition. This is a new phenomenon. When I was, in the heyday of clinical nursing, we had all the, mostly, not always, but mostly young girls that were hospitalized because they just had severe eating disorders, to the point that they required hospitalization, whether it be, anorexia, starving themselves to death, or bulimic, or binging and purging or something. Then it went to cutting. Now it seems to be this sort of trans, I'm born in the wrong body now, I need to be a man, or, but it's definitely an area that needs study and attention, because anytime you're dealing with a suicide potential, there's so many factors, and I saw that back to the detransitioners, where were the road cards when these people entered into the trans space of medical, that were saying, what's your home life like? What's your school life like? What's your relationship with your parents? Are you on some kind of an autism spectrum? I got an email just the other day from some grandparents who say their 5-year-old grandson is now being transitioned by his parents to being a little girl, and the grandparents say since he's 2, he has horrible OCD. We know a lot of these people have OCD, so we play the suicide card, like, oh, you got to do this, but we don't look at all these other things. How much time is this child spending on the internet? You just, in the research of this film, I spent way too much time on Snapchat and on TikTok and on Instagram. It is just unbelievable, the images that you will see and the GoFundMe. Just pages and pages and pages of GoFundMe where people are trying to raise money so that they can have their double mastectomies, and do their transition surgeries and stuff. And these children, in the height of what should be their innocent, free, just go out and play days and have fun, are just being bombarded. Pornography. Just the stuff that these kids are seeing, that I think, there's so much other things that we need to be talking about versus, oh, if you don't do this, they're going to kill themselves. That's just lazy. That's just a cheap shot.
Yeah, the element of social media grooming is tremendous. I don't even know if most people fully understand how bad it really is out there. For example, I was looking at TikTok the other day for this reason, and I saw an account belonging to a woman who has 500,000 followers. And the main topics that she talks about are gender identity, gender dysphoria, and adult sexual fetishes. So, if a child uses TikTok, which, by the way, over a third of users are minors, then searches for gender identity or dysphoria, her videos will come up. And then they might go to her channel and see all these videos about asphyxiation, BDSM, and so on.
Yeah. And I was shocked because a lot of the physicians who practice this type of surgery, they have their channels where they're peddling their wares. And I'm like going, holy dear Lord, what is, I'm just, yeah. So, yeah, if suicides are on the rise, there's a million other reasons that we should be looking at what is causing children to just, end their lives. It's not this, I've been born in the wrong body. And I really think I am a girl when I was born a boy.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And just speaking of this again, just briefly, I wanted to share another example with you I saw on TikTok, which was an account belonging to a 16-year-old girl who had medically transitioned. And in one of her videos, she said that when she was 8, she identified as a lesbian, but then began identifying as a boy and started puberty blockers at the age of 11. And by the age of 15, she had undergone a double mastectomy. And her videos are among the first to appear if you search the term top surgery on TikTok, which, by the way, has over 800 million views. There seems to be this kind of idea in gender ideology that if children are uncomfortable in their bodies, it must be somehow natural or innate, which seems bizarre to me. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that and the source of this discomfort and where you think it might be coming from.
Yeah, I don't know that I can answer that definitively, but we all just know, the growing up is awkward and hard at times. And some phases of growing up and developing from a child, into an adolescent, into a young adult, into an adult, there's just all the, acne and awkwardness in your body, and, your body starts doing things and you're like, whoa, what's going on here? And there's all this pressure at school amongst your peers. I'm really tall, and I was one of those people that I was really tall at a very young age. So I didn't sort of kind of gradually grow to be tall. So I was always the tallest one in class. I was always made fun of. I always had to be the first in the line. I always had, the teacher would call on me to do things if it required somebody that could reach up high. And I just always hated that because the boys hated me, because I got to do like really cool things that boys wanted to do, but then like, we'll have her do that. So, that's always, that's, I think, been with us since the beginning of time, just sort of that transitioning of our bodies through the different developmental stages. And so do we need to, we've done so much, good work around bullying, wasn't it, I don't know, one of the president's wives, maybe it was Michelle. I don't, they all the first ladies had their sort of hobby cause. One of them was like anti-bullying. I don't remember who, but we're really aware of just how mean kids can be and how we poke fun and make fun of kids that aren't whatever we think they should be. Yeah, and I don't know, but I just, if we could just get kids off screens, because they're being influenced, and they're just, we know that you can filter a million ways to make yourself look prettier, and all these girls with their pouty lip, duck lip selfies, and make, get kids off their screens and just, back to just being friends with people that they can be with in person.
Yeah, I think a real conversation needs to be had about the impact of technology on body dissociation, body image. I do see that starting to happen more and more these days, so that's a positive development. But in my opinion, the time spent with technology and social media is definitely influential in this gender movement and possibly even in the condition of dysphoria. So, what is the main underlying issue for you? And by that I mean, what is it that you think that's really driving this movement? Different people have different ideas about what's going on. In my case, I do a lot of work looking at the role of pornography, the sort of sexual side of things, so to speak. So I'm just wondering for you if there's something you see as the fundamental problem here or the issue that you are most dedicated to bringing awareness to.
Yeah, I mean, what really is driving me is stopping this from happening to children. That's why I made the film. That's why I'm trying to get everybody in the world to watch the film. It's, calling to task all the adults to stop doing this to children, and finding a way to help children that are, again, oftentimes truly in distress, but finding them the help that they need that does not alter their physical bodies through medicine and through surgeries that they do not need in order to solve their problems and feel better. It's calling to task the medical profession to stop doing butchery, to stop chopping off healthy body parts and thinking that that's going to help somebody.
And what has been the reaction so far to your film? Have you gotten some comments from parents or from politicians?
Yeah, well, like you said in the intro, the film hasn't been yanked off of YouTube, which on day one, we thought, how long will it stay up before they pull it? So we also actually already have it on Vimeo. We built a Rumble page. We have the film on Rumble. So the film is on other sites because we thought, immediately we're going to just get canceled and get the film pulled. So that was a good reaction that so far we have not had that. Overwhelmingly, the thousands of comments on the YouTube channel are overwhelmingly positive. Yes, there's some negative. Yes, there's some trans activists saying that this is a propaganda film. So that's out there. It's being translated right now into Hungarian, into Chinese, because we've already been contacted by people in Hungary and people in China that have seen the film. So that's been an sort of unexpected outcome. And so we're already thinking that will probably happen with other countries as word gets out more on the film. Other countries will want to do that. So we have a really friendly, favorable, no charge. You guys just translate the script and send us a file of the translated script, and we'll throw it up in YouTube with the subtitles. Nothing legislatively, but it's a September. So when the film came out in June, all the legislation, all those cycles, the legislative cycles were not open. Everybody was out in their districts over the summer, shaking hands and, kissing babies and trying to keep their constituents happy. So whether or not we will see some laws being introduced, particularly here in the United States, whether we're called to testify, whether we're called to screen the film in, capitals to legislators. We haven't had that. We have been disappointed that we haven't gotten any good mainstream media press. We didn't think we would, but you're still always kind of hopeful that, the New York Times and the Washington Post will want to write about your film. But of course, they've sort of ignored it. So most of the sort of traditional news outlets that have always been reporting on the transing of kids, were the few, the sites that ran stories or reviews of the film. We were really happy that our donor who funded the making of the film wanted it to be free. So we are pleased that people can, watch it without having to pay to watch it. We know that a lot of support groups that like I think the first day it came out or the next day, I immediately got an email from a father who's in like a support group of about 50 families in his area that all have children in this space, different stages of this space. And they were just so, thank you very much for making this film. And they've organized a screening and showed it to their group and had all their parents see it. They've tried to get it shown in their schools now that schools are back. But so far the schools are not allowing the film to be shown there. But yeah, we no complaints. The interesting thing though, because again, it's a controversial film, and we hired a social media team to run our campaign for 3 months, and they're done. We just had our final report with them the other day, and we did a lot of paid advertisement around short clips of the film. And we had well over 1 million people watch the clips, whether they were clips of Hachi, a detransitioner, one of the experts, a mother, we had all, different people, Colin Wright, Megan Murphy clips. YouTube would not allow us to ever do any paid advertisement. So we were shut out from YouTube. They didn't pull the film, but they would not allow us to pay any advertisement. But people overwhelmingly watched, all of whatever the content we served in front of them. So they didn't sometimes you just a clip shows up in your feed and you watch it for about a second and you close it down because you're not interested. And it was like 99% of the people that had something show up in their feed watched it to the end. The liking and the sharing was almost zero because people don't want to be outed. So they would watch it, but they didn't want people to know that they liked it, because you can watch something and nobody knows you watched it. We knew they watched it. We don't know who they are, but we knew people were watching it. But the people who were watching it didn't want to like and share it. And we know the cost. If you speak out and you're in favor of this film, you lose your job. You're ostracized at the cocktail parties or in the neighborhood or at your kid's school. So you can't be liking and sharing. Everybody watched this film. So it was really hard to get momentum for people to say, please watch this film. It's the best film. It's really important, whatever. That just, it did happen, but not in the proportion to how many people were consuming all of the content. A lot of times it was kind of a more equal. People were really riveted and like something and they'll tell their friends. But we can't prove that, but we think it's because the minute you like or share something, that's public.
Speaking of the backlash, have you received any yourself personally for the issues that you discuss? I mean, surrogacy itself being a controversial issue as well.
Yeah, I have my share of haters. I have my share of, trolls and people who say horrible things about, I should, one person said I should brush my teeth with a shotgun, and one person said somebody should put a bullet through my head. They're just, I think somebody told me to suck a bag of dicks, just really, and of course they never put their name to it. There's some, like avatar or troll kind of person. Yeah, but that I don't really care. Honestly, I don't care. I'm not worried about, I work for myself. I'm my own boss. I'm not going to fire myself. And, I run a nonprofit. So far the people that support our work financially, or keep supporting our work. So we're still in business. But, people like Megan Murphy, her livelihood was immediately cut. And that was one area. We never did paid advertisements on Twitter because we did not want to get, Twitter is much more prickly about who they block and who they censor, and so we just stayed away. So all of our promotion was heavily Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. We tried Snapchat, but Snapchat would not let us do any paid advertisement like YouTube. YouTube would let us do paid advertisement to our short little clips, but no paid advertisement to watch the whole film.
And was that immediate?
Immediately.
How did they know?
Yeah, I don't know. And, when you sort of set your parameters to try to monetize stuff that is on your channel, a lot of our content on our channel, we're not allowed to monetize. And so, and they kind of have these pat answers around, our paid advertisers wouldn't be interested in this content. So we're not going to let you monetize it. So I think we had 17,000 hours worth of viewing on our, transmission film, which, it's still, you don't make a lot of money when you monetize stuff on your channel, but just the fact that they wouldn't let us monetize the film. So we're not in this for the money.
Yeah, I think the people who get involved in this side of the fight on our side tend to be, well, I'm generalizing, but tend to be very honest because there's no money in it. It can actually be a form of career suicide, but the fact that so many people are opposing gender ideology and transing children should say something, especially how so many people from different backgrounds and different sides of the political spectrum are in agreement in opposing the transing of children. It really speaks volumes. But how can people view your documentary and support your work or see the other films that you've made in regards to the surrogacy industry?
Yeah, all of I wanted to say all of our films used to be on Amazon, but Amazon is slowly pulling our films down too. So we have over the summer we've moved every film we've ever produced, and all of we have a lot of just interviews and stuff that we've done are on our YouTube channel. So it's the Center for Bioethics and Culture Network. So if they just typed in, even if you just typed in the name of the film, Transmission, What's the Rush to Reassign Gender, it would take you to our channel, and then you can watch all of our films there for free. Our website is cbc-network.org, and that's where you can read articles about egg freezing and egg banking and surrogacy, and we have tons and tons of resources there on the material that we've been producing over the last 2 decades. But yeah, I think a first stop just over to the YouTube channel is a good place to poke around, and you can watch movies to your heart's content for free. We just said, forget you, Amazon.
Thank you so much for talking with me today, Jennifer.
It's been fun. Thank you for having me, Genevieve. Nice to finally meet you.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks again for tuning in. Jennifer can be found on Twitter at Jennifer Lahl, Lahl, and myself, I'm on Twitter at Women Read Women. Please do go check out her film, Transmission, What's the Rush to Assign Gender, as well as her other films regarding the harms of the surrogacy industry.